fears Ivan very deeply. In any case, the two of them get together, and the old man is drinking cognac, and he says, now look, I ask Alyosha, does God exist? And Alyosha says, da, yes. I ask Ivan, does God exist? And Ivan says, niet, no, God does not exist. Well, whom am I to believe? Am I to believe Ivan, the skeptic? Am I to believe my son Alyosha, the religious one? Whom am I to believe? That it's the problem of the existence of God, the problem of the existence of divinity in the world is put very, very starkly by Dostoevsky in this novel. And then Dmitri, the sensualist, seeks out his very religious brother Alyosha, and he goes into a long, long story about some of the terrible things that he's done with women in the past. And then he says a very famous phrase, often quoted from Dostoevsky, beauty, he says, I can't bear the fact that a person with the best heart, the highest mind, begins with the greatest idea that humankind ever had, the idea of the Madonna, and then step by step ends up with Sodom, with the Karamazov conscience. It's even more terrible that a person with the ideal of Sodom in his soul does not reject the idea of the Madonna. His soul burns with that ideal, truly it burns as it did in his younger, innocent years. No, the human creature is too broad, even way too broad. I would make him narrower. Слишком широк человек. Я сделал бы его уже. Too broad is humankind. If I had created him, I would have made him more narrow. Here we have the height of Dostoevsky's statement about the moral and psychological complexity of human reality, the deep divisions in the human personality with which every single one of us struggles. And of course, as Dmitri struggles with his own passion and lust, Alyosha sees the decent side of his brother even as he sees his deep weaknesses. All these things take place in a section called The Sensualist. But of course, for most readers, the most powerful part of the novel occurs after Alyosha meets with Dmitri. He meets with his brother Ivan. And Ivan, in the section, is called Pro and Contra, for and against. And of course, again, Alyosha is the witness to the passions of his brother. Ivan is tremendously eager to see his brother, whom he hasn't seen for a long time. He knows he's religious, and he knows he believes deeply in Christ, and he begins to taunt him. He says, look, you know something about the existence of evil in the world. Alyosha says, yes, I've seen some of that. You know that people are capable of terrible passions, are capable of terrible hatred. Let me tell you about some of the things that happen in this world. You know, there's certain Russian landowners who are terribly crazy, who misuse the power they have over their serfs in a hideous way. He said that the famous case, for example, he said, of course, there are people who beat little children. You understand what it means to beat people who are totally innocent, the kind of sadism that's involved in the suffering of the innocent. But in this particular case, here was a landowner who had some hunting dogs, of which he was very fond, and there was a little kid, the son of one of the serfs, who was playing on his estate. The kid was attracted to the dogs. He wanted to play with them, and instead of doing accidentally, he hurt the paw of the dog. He hurt the paw of one of these hunting dogs, of which the landowner was so proud. And so the landowner decided the punishment would be that he would give the kid a head start and then set the dogs upon him, and before the eyes of the mother, the dogs would tear the child apart. And the mother was forced to view that. It was forced to view the hideous tearing apart of her own child by hunting dogs. He said, what should be done to such a man? And Alyosha says, he should be punished. He should be whipped. Oh, he says, there's a devil in you too, brother, eh? He says, look, it's not that, Ivan says, it's not that I reject the idea of paradise. It's not that I reject the idea of God, but I respectfully return my ticket to paradise rather than go there at the price of even one drop of innocent blood. Who could forgive such a person who did what I just described? And Alyosha says, wait. There is one person, there is one figure in history who could forgive even that. And Ivan says, oh, I was waiting for that. I was wondering how long it was going to be before you would talk about him with a capital H, of course, the figure of Christ. He said, you know, I made up a little story about this that I'd like you to hear. It's called The Tale of the Grand Inquisitor, the part of this novel, of course, that is most often quoted and most often thought about by the readers of this novel. And then Ivan proceeds to tell this terrible tale. As a matter of fact, when Dostoevsky was writing this, he was the height of his passion, and he was dictating to his wife. You remember that as a very young woman, she was able to take dictation, and sometimes he would dictate whole scenes to her. He dictated this whole thing to her in the height of passion. At the end, he said, Anya, what do you think of it? And she said, marvelous, Fedja, marvelous. He said, no, look, I don't want to hear that. I want to hear your real opinion. And she said, well, to tell you the truth, I didn't understand it. He said, what do you mean you didn't understand it? And he began to explain it, and she says in her memoirs, the more he explained it, the less I understood. And of course, when you read it, you can well understand why she had trouble in understanding it. It's a very tricky and a very difficult thing to understand. It's the height of Dostoevsky's, in some ways, very nasty and very sadistic dialectics, but at the same time, something that goes very deeply to the heart of the human soul and the human heart. The scene takes place in 15th century Seville, where the sidewalks are warm and you can feel the warmth under your feet, very unlike Russia, of course. It's a time after an auto da fe, when many people have been tortured and killed by the Inquisition of the Church because they were heretics. All of this, of course, done ad maiorem gloriam Dei, for the greater glory of God. And as the people are waiting in suspense, after the whole thing has been over, people have been hung, people have been burned and quartered, the horrible tortures of the Inquisition, you notice suddenly on the square there's lying a very neat little coffin. And in this coffin is lying a dead young girl, perhaps 12 or 13 years old, beautiful even in death. It looks as if she might just be sleeping. Here she is in the coffin, and the family is grieving terribly. You can imagine what it means to lose a young child like that. There's virtually no word to describe their grief, and of course it ties in with the suffering that's taken before. And as this is going on, suddenly he appears. He, of course, again with a capital H. And people immediately recognize him. They immediately recognize it's Jesus. This is an epiphany. He's come, and he's come to visit them. And they beg him, please, please, Lord, resurrect this child. And Jesus goes to the coffin, and he says, Talitha kumi. In Hebrew, of course, young maiden, arise. And miraculously, suddenly, the girl who had been dead sits up in the coffin, wipes the tears from her eyes, wipes the sleep from her eyes, and the parents are overwhelmed with joy. The Savior has come back, and once again, he has caused a resurrection. Once again, he's caused a miracle. This is magnificent, and of course, they go to worship him and to hail him and do everything that a good Christian would think would be done for the appearance of the Lord. In the midst of all this joy, suddenly an old man appears, perhaps in his 80s, the Grand Inquisitor, who's just been coming from the torture and the murder of the so-called heretics of the church. He looks at this, he frowns, and suddenly he says, arrest that man. You understand, he's an officer of the church. He's something like a bishop in the church. But nevertheless, to Jesus, he says, arrest that man. And of course, Ivan Karamazov says, such was his authority that nobody dared oppose him, and Jesus Christ himself they took away under arrest. You can imagine the effect this has on any believing Christian at that particular time in Russia. And of course then we see the Grand Inquisitor in the cell, in the holding cell, where he confronts Jesus with a curious accusation. He says that you, the Savior, you, Jesus, who founded this church. Well, of course, Jesus didn't really found the church. It was Paul. But nevertheless, Jesus' ideas were the foundation church. You have been obstructing the work of the church. Now, how could it be that Jesus Christ himself would be a stumbling block to Christians? It's, of course, an argument that atheists are very happy to use. They often say, well, you call yourself a Christian, but if Jesus were alive today, he would sympathize with us and not with you who call yourself Christians, but act in very cruel and very wrong ways. Jesus is totally silent. Now, why was it that Jesus had, the Grand Inquisitor considered Jesus to be an obstacle to the church? Not the one who gave the ideas to the church, but rather an obstacle. Well, because, you see, Jesus wanted people to come to him freely. Jesus, that is, wanted people to come to himself, to Jesus, to Christianity freely, out of love, not by guilt, not by miracle, but out of love. And of course, it takes a very, very strong person to come to belief and to religion simply out of love. Because, says the Grand Inquisitor, your religion is fine for a few strong people, throughout history. Oh yes, perhaps 1 or 2% of the people are strong enough to maintain a belief on the basis which you want, but we appeal to the masses of people who are weak, who are slaves, who want people to dominate them. They want bread. They bring their bread to us, and then we give it to them, and they're grateful for the fact that we give it to them. They don't want freedom. They don't want the kind of strength that you bring to them. They want rather the slavery, the security that we give them. Of course, begin to think about this and think about some of the problems of the 20th, and let's hope not also the 21st century. Dostoevsky is probing something here very close to what we know, not only in religion, but in politics and in aesthetics and in many other things as well. You want strong people. We appeal to weak people. I have sacrificed the salvation of my own soul. He says, look, I know what's going to happen when I die and come to the afterworld. Your people are going to send me to hell, but even though they're sending me to hell for the good of the people, for the good of the masses of people who are weak, who want to be slaves, I am taking care of them. You appeal only to the strong people. That's why you're stopping the work of the church, and I will block what you're doing. I will see to it that you stay under arrest. I will not let you interfere with our work. Jesus says not a word. And then, of course, the Grand Inquisitor goes to a very famous part of the New Testament. You remember that Jesus goes out into the wilderness for fasting and for contemplation. And while he's in the wilderness, of course, this being a Dostoevsky novel, and of course Dostoevsky having read the Gospel, who is he approached by? He's approached by the devil. And the devil is out to get Jesus, to make him understand the strength of the devil. And so he brings to the fore very powerful ways in which to get Jesus. Of course, in the beginning he says, look, you see those stones? He said, turn those stones to bread. People want bread. People need bread. Give it to them, and you give them sustenance, and they'll follow you. And of course, Jesus gives a very famous answer. He says, not by bread alone does man exist. Не хлебом единым живет человек. Not by bread alone. All right, says the devil. In that case, put yourself up on a tower. Go to the very top of that tower and throw yourself from the tower. Of course, God, your Father, will save you. Of course, angels will come down to hold you and prevent your fatal fall. People will see that miracle and will believe. They'll believe because of that miracle. Jesus says, tempt not the Lord thy God. In short, don't tempt me with power. Power is not something that I want. All right, he said, these are the cities of the world. I put them before you. Take power over those cities. And Jesus says, get thee behind me, Satan. Having said this, the Grand Inquisitor says, you made a mistake. You should have listened to what he said. And suddenly, Jesus gets up, kisses him on the lips, and wordlessly walks out of the cell. Well, Alyosha listens to what he said. I don't understand it. What do you mean? What are you trying to say? You seem to be, you're on one side you're for the atheists, on the other side you're for the church. Is this against the Roman Catholic Church? Is this for, what's going on? And Ivan says, has your imagination been so ruined by realism you can't take fantasy? And Alyosha suddenly gets an inspiration. He says, he kisses Ivan wordlessly on the lips and walks out. And Ivan says, plagiarism! Anyone who thinks Dostoevsky does not have humor in addition to depth is quite wrong.